Yeah, so I guess we should be addressing, obviously the latest development in the, political landscape of Portugal. It's been in the making essentially for almost more than a year, or about a year. I guess on and off, we've been having this conversation.
For a long time, yeah.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately media just did the same thing it always does. It just kind of, zoomed in and like created this huge fuss about it and just like make it into something that it really wasn't without even explaining the alternatives that are like available around it. So I feel like, everyone is just like, oh, but like what happens to the passport? But like, if you look around, this is like an EU level requirement typically for most of the countries when you're applying.
Yeah, although the nationality rules, who regulates that will be each country, they have sovereignty to do that. But there is like some standard rules that if we compare to other EU countries, and I believe Portugal is coming closer to those standards.
No, because Italy for sure, I know it's 10. Spain, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it is higher definitely than the 5 years.
Yeah,
because it's just not, I think, it's kind of like it's no longer the benchmark for citizenship. It doesn't mean or reflect that, there's immigration crisis or they're closing the immigration, as a route. Obviously they're attracting talent, attracting investors, expats who bring value to the society, economics, and politically here. Yeah. So it's definitely not targeting any of those groups. Yeah, but programs are groups of people, obviously.
Yeah.
Everyone's still welcome. Nothing has really changed. Yes, the requirements has been raised, and it's just to reassure, because I've heard those stories. I'm not entirely sure how true they are. That people would await their passport only to then go to a different EU member state because they're obviously better work opportunities and maybe like a social welfare packages. So they would just like relocate, and it's like the whole point was to get the passport and go. But that's obviously not what the country would like to have. Representing Portugal.
Yeah, and we have two separate laws. This is very important to be clear because we have all the immigration programs, visas, residence permits. They are regulated by the general immigration law, which is not being changed right now. So the big news is all about the nationality law and mainly the increased period to be able to become eligible for the Portuguese citizenship. So basically from 5, they are increasing to 10 in general, like for the general public, and to 7 for people from the Portuguese-speaking countries and also EU citizens from other countries.
Yeah. So. No, because I feel like, obviously you have to look at this at like a hierarchy. So, if the end goal is the passport, yes, now one of the requirements becomes, extended. But if the goal or like objective of your participation in a certain program or relocation was, especially for golden visa, let's say, because I still talk to prospects and some clients, asking that, are they, terminating the program? No, there was no conversation around that whatsoever. If anything, the government is pretty much in favor of that because we're still seeing, the results that the investors are bringing into the country. And I know for myself, like I can definitely see how Portugal is a completely different country from let's say like 10, 12 years ago. Yeah, so I don't think, these conversations, they really have to be separated. So golden visa is here to stay. No one has any concerns or no amendments to it are pending. There's not even conversations around it.
And it's still one of the best programs available.
It is definitely the most competitive in the EU for sure. And then as far as like citizenship goes, once again, we're kind of dissecting it and going into golden visa permit holders. You have the golden permanent residence, which still allows you to obviously keep your minimum stay to the same as it was on your permit. But permanent residence, obviously, it's a different kind of level of a residence permit because it does not require you to prove anything anymore because you just need to refresh it. It's just kind of like a driver's license, just you kind of need to have a fresh batch of that plastic, and that's it. And it will be issued for 5 years, and if you are concerned then, like, how many renewals? Well, the amount of renewals stays essentially the same because, the same as you would have applied for citizenship. At this stage, you will be applying for permanent residence. And also, I think it's kind of like a valid point to, like, governments come and go, there's different parties. So, just because it changed now doesn't mean it cannot change in the near future. We can all witness that all around the world. So, I feel like, what we can do as, people who are making informed decisions is just to kind of stay agile, just like kind of, okay, so what's my available option right now? And take and see if that works for you. But just because the citizenship is no longer available does not mean there are no options whatsoever.
And it's still like a stable program, even though they cut some type of investments in the recent years. For example, the real estate investment that is no longer available. We do have a lot of good opportunities for people to invest, mostly here in funds. We have several funds available to invest that are eligible for the golden visa. So we still have those opportunities. It's a simpler process if we compare to some years ago when people had to wait very long to be called for their biometrics appointment. We are noticing some improvements, and people who applied like last year in 2025, they have been called already and are in the process of getting their permits, the first permit. So this long waiting period is no longer that long, so it's being improved, this part.
Yeah.
The thing is that the law change, actually they removed one of the articles that explicitly would say that the start date for the residence period will be the application date.
Okay, so it's back to being vague now.
Now, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so there's room for interpretation, essentially.
Being vague, actually, we could interpret the law being conservative and understanding that actually it should be from the card issuance date, the first card.
Yeah.
However, when the president signed the law change this last Sunday, there were two main statements that he provided. We have them, the official statements from the president. One about not being able to harm pending processes, and for that we understand citizenship applications that are still waiting for the approval, those cannot be harmed. This was quite obvious, actually.
Yeah.
But he also provided a different statement saying that for the period of residency, for calculating that, people cannot be harmed due to the delays from the government. And we know that actually from the application date for a residence permit, the government has 90 business days, which will be, we can say, more or less 4 months after the application, they should provide a decision.
Yeah.
And we know that there are people waiting for like 1 year, 2 years, or even more. So of course, these people are being harmed and jeopardized. And so we need to understand that from this statement from the president, there could be some indication. We would have some like rooms to be able to discuss that.
I really think so too, because I think each case will have to be reviewed individually. And if you are someone who was waiting for years and years on end, I think they are not going to enforce. And this is personal opinion, obviously, but they cannot. And I'm definitely sure that you can at least argue that, it's like the legal help that, you've spent, if you have everything, kind of documented. Yeah, so if everything is documented every step of the way, and then under this legislation I have applied, I've spent so many years, whereas you as a immigrational institute, say that you have to provide a decision within 90 days, and it's been 3 years, so I think there's just so much that you can obviously, there's a lot of leverage in being in that position.
Yeah.
So it's always not lost, it's not, legal, it's never as black and white, you can argue and debate, and you can definitely find a way.
There is no reason to panic right now, because we know the news are being very strong, saying that things are completely different right now, but we still need to be careful because the law hasn't been published yet. So the president approved last Sunday, and it's likely that they will publish the new law maybe until the end of this week or next week. It will take around 2 weeks so we can have the clear information about the text of the law. From this part, we may still have some vague parts in this text, and those should be also clarified by the regulatory decree that they will issue after the law is published. So we will have even more clarity after that. I would say that after this regulatory decree, we will have a clear scenario on how things will be from now on.
Yeah.
So we don't need to take early conclusions, just wait, and also just check with all lawyers, like your lawyer. We can always help to clarify these parts, but we need to wait for the clear scenario.
Yeah.
And right now, it's not available yet.
No, and that's where I would definitely say, panicking is really not helping anyone right now. I think you have to patiently really wait until the latest version of the new law and with all the, relevant provisions to it. And if anything is vague, it might actually serve in your favor. So also something to await before you actually start acting. But, panic withdrawing, panic applying, that's not going to help anyone. And that's just not the way to go about the immigration procedures, because, immigration is a dynamic landscape regardless.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a party comes, you know, and something, and you always have to like keep an eye on that and keep your finger on the pulse. But this is the current thing, and if you are a golden visa permit holder or considering actually applying for one, we just explained, you know, obviously that you have this like safe haven of applying for the golden permanent residence, which is providing you with all the benefits in the world, almost like the citizenship, just minus two things, that is not being able to full-time become a tax resident and a resident of another EU member of state. And the vote.
And being able to withdraw the investment after 5 years. So
That is the
if
crucial
you are
part.
waiting for to apply for the citizenship later after 10 years, you can actually withdraw the investment for the golden visa after 5 years, because the law currently only requires applicants to keep the investment for 5 years.
Yeah.
So this is also good.
Yeah.
You can keep the status as a golden visa
That's a really good
holder
one, thank you.
after that.
Yeah, no, because I mean, definitely like that sort of, you could call it a limbo, but it's not really, because obviously you're still having all the perks minus the financial like liability and the burden. So, you know, you're still on the path, nothing has changed. It's just, you know, one of the requirements is being, you know, extended. That's essentially all the
So,
same benefits.
Definitely is still a good program to engage on. Right, so basically now, for every golden visa holder, after 5 years, you can withdraw the investment, and you have mainly three options to proceed. You can either apply for a permanent golden visa permit. So this one, you can keep the benefits of not needing to leave in the country, just spending 14 days every period of 2 years. Or you can even apply for a long-term EU residence permit. This one, it requires you to live here actually. So if the intention is to come and live in Portugal, you can apply for this long-term EU resident, and you will have more rights in the other EU countries. It's almost like holding an EU passport. Like it's easier for moving to a different EU country. If you want to settle in Spain or Germany or any of these countries, you can go and you don't need to apply for a prior visa, residence visa. You can just go and apply directly to switch the permit from Portugal to this other country. Of course, you'll need to have a reason for that. If you have a work contract, if you want to study abroad, it's like an easier process to become a legal resident in the other EU country.
Yeah, no, I've heard
So
about that.
this long-term EU is very, very good, a good option. All right. And
Yes.
a third option also would be to apply for a standard permanent.
Permanent
Yeah, I
residence.
can just see
Yeah. Okay, yeah, let's just sort of keep referring it to PR. So you have a GPR, Golden Permanent Residence. You have normal PR, which would be issued for Portugal by Portugal. So you have to live and stay here. And then there is a third option, which is the EU long-term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The EU long-term and the standard PR in Portugal, they are basically the same, but the long-term grants more rights.
Okay.
So it doesn't make
the-
sense to apply for the normal one. You can apply directly for
EU.
the EU
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
Those will require, there are state requirements here that will be more complicated than the GV one. So you need to actually live in the country.
Because you are then a tax resident here.
Then you
Yeah, then you have to be.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you do consider moving to another EU member of state, obviously you know that's something to, like, you will have to comply with that jurisdiction and to how to switch, but then also transferring all the tax is also there. Okay.
Yeah.
So as long as this is something for like a special golden visa, you know, just be mindful of, if you go with the GPR, you remain your tax residency outside of EU for as long as you wish to keep it that way.
and keep
Any
the benefit.
other one that would be moving your tax residency here, and this is something that you always have to consider.
For all of those, there is an extra requirement. If you compare to the previous renewals, you need to provide proof that you have knowledge and proficiency in Portuguese language.
Yeah.
So you will need to provide a certificate for that.
But isn't it for all of them? For all of
Yeah,
them?
for the
Okay.
three of them.
Yeah.
But also, if you don't have that after 5 years, you can still apply for a new temporary permit. So just keep renewing the temporary permits. It's
Okay.
also possible.
Okay.
But for golden visas, remembering that the application fee is higher than the other ones.
The
way
golden PR.
higher. Yeah.
It's like twice.
It's no more than that.
Okay.
So for the golden visa PR will be around 6,000. Currently, that's the fee.
But it's for 5 years, so once you pay that, at least it's covered. So
We can always help like case by case and identify what's the best path for each applicant.
yeah, I think that's what it kind of all boils down to. It's just honestly, there is no need to panic. And you know, if you are working with your current legal provider, just reach out to them, see what your situation is, what your available routes are, depending on your goals and objectives. The year they are applying, And I guess I would certainly recommend to everyone, who still has any questions after this, to join us for our webinar after the law is officially published.
So then we'll have all the details about the text, the final text of the law, and we can clarify this information based on what's available.
Yeah, on the actual legal official verbiage.
Yeah.
So I think it would be more, interesting and relevant for everyone.
Yeah, pretty soon.